Okay, we spent the last 2-3 weeks, maybe longer, talking trash on the offense. Let's spread it around a little bit here. Let's not just be about the offense. Let's hate everyone equally. Let's talk about Pitt's defense on the Morning Pitt today on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. The way I just said that on the Morning Pitt today, maybe we should change the name. You know, we're all talking about changes, right? Steelers need to make changes. Pitt needs to make changes. What are they going to do during the bye week? What kind of changes are they going to make? Maybe during the bye week here, we should make the change and call this Morning Pitt today, or maybe just Pitt today. You know, maybe we need to switch it up. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's behind a lot of the issues is that we're still calling this the Morning Pitt as opposed to the Morning Pitt today or Pitt today or your daily Pitt. We'll just stick with Morning Pitt. Anyway, you know the deal here. Like this video and subscribe. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So you don't miss any of the Pitt video content that we have. We've got our daily morning Pitt videos like this one that you're watching. We've got the live show tonight, every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammock get together, talk a little Pitt sports. We got the live post-game show that we do when there are games, and there are no games this weekend, so we won't have one of those. But next week after the Louisville game, which kicks off at 6:30, homecoming game in Acrisure Stadium, 6:30 kickoff. After that game ends, probably an hour or two after the game ends, we will go live for our post-game show right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You want to make sure you don't miss that. So like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, the website right there, Panther-Lair.com. Most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day. Every day, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And we have been trashing the offense quite a bit lately. Rightfully so, but we've been giving them their fair share of guff, as you will, or if you will. And so I thought we could talk about the defense just for a little bit here, partially because I put up the video yesterday about the most realistic change Pitt could make, and it was an obvious thing. I talked about changing quarterbacks, but sometimes the obvious thing has merit, and just because it's obvious doesn't make it any less worthy of consideration or discussion. And I think there were a lot of things to talk about there. But a couple of the comments on the YouTube video, and I appreciate everybody who watches and then comments on the YouTube video. I really like it when we talk about it on the message boards, but I appreciate everybody who comments on the YouTube video too. And there were a couple comments that were like, look, what are you going to do when you give up 38 points to Virginia Tech? The problem was the defense. The problem wasn't the offense. I think somebody even said that Phil Dracovic played well at Virginia Tech. I mean, brother, he completed 5 passes in the first 54 minutes of that game. He didn't play well. But I digress. You're right. Pitt's defense gave up 38 points to Virginia Tech, and that's more than you should give up. You should hold opponents under that number. You shouldn't give up 38 points. You shouldn't give up 35 or 31. I think it's reasonable to aim for holding an opponent under 30. But the problem with that is you have to be able to score more than 30. And I can't really go too hard on the defense after giving up 41 against Carolina and 30, although they had 7 on punt return, and then 38 against against Virginia Tech. When I'm looking at those two games and Pitt scored 4 offensive touchdowns in those two games, asking your defense to make up for scoring just 2 offensive touchdowns against North Carolina and 2 offensive touchdowns against Virginia Tech, I don't want to say that's asking too much, but you're asking for a perfect game. You're not, if you're going to say that the defense blew it against Virginia Tech, they gave up 38 points, I can counter that pretty strongly by saying the offense only scored 2 touchdowns. The defense scored half as many touchdowns as the offense in that game of Virginia Tech. Pitt scored 21 points. The defense scored 7 of those itself. I can't come down too hard on the defense when we look at the dumpster fire that the offense has been. 7 offensive touchdowns in 4 games against FBS competition. I'm sorry, but if that's what you're putting up, I don't care what your defense does, it's going to be very hard to win games. When you're asking your defense to pitch a shutout every single week, if you put your defense in a situation where giving up just 1 long drive, just 1 scoring drive could potentially cost you the game, you're not doing your part. Now, that's not to say that the defense has been perfect. And like I said, we're going to spread the hate equally. We are going to, pick apart the defense, just like we've been doing, maybe not quite like we've been doing to the offense the past few days, past few weeks, past month. But we are going to pick apart some of the problems with the defense and some of the things that they need to do and maybe improve. But don't get it twisted. This team's problem is offense. Period, point blank. And anything beyond that is just looking for something different to talk about. I mean, honestly, just because we talk about the offense every day. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about the defense today. We're going to talk about some of the issues that it has, but, it's one of two things. You talk about the defense just because you're bored talking about the offense every day, or you talk about the defense because you want to just sort of paint a broad picture of everything being broken. Which I understand the motivations behind both. My motivation is going to be the former. If your motivation is the latter, so be it. We're going to talk about the defense. But it's impossible to talk about some of these things with the defense without coming back to the offense. I did some time of possession stats, and I know time of possession is not the end-all be-all. Time of possession is not something that, it's not a completely irrelevant stat, but, you want touchdown drives, whether they take 9 minutes or 1 minute. And a 1 minute touchdown drive is far better than a 9 minute field goal drive or a 9 minute turnover on downs drive, even though time of possession is going to favor that longer drive with lesser results. The 75-yard touchdown pass to Bub Means was, didn't do a whole lot for time of possession, but it did a whole lot more for Pitt's chances of winning that game than the first drive against, West Virginia, which took 13 minutes or however long it took. If you're gonna ask a coach or a player or a fan or anybody, what drive would you rather have? You want the touchdown drive. So we don't want to put too much stock in time of possession, but these numbers are remarkable. Remarkable. Cincinnati, Pitt lost the time of possession by 9.5 minutes. West Virginia, 6.5 minutes. Carolina, only 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Virginia Tech, 15 minutes and 28 seconds. If you add up those 4 FBS games, Pitt has lost time of possession total against FBS opponents by more than 30 minutes, 33 minutes and 34 seconds. That the other team had offense on the field more than Pitt had offense on the field. That's a lot of extra time for your defense to be on the field. And after 5 games, the last 4 of which have been lost almost exclusively by offense. Again, not that the defense was perfect, but it's hard to say the offense did anything to help win those games when they've scored 7 offensive touchdowns total. It's tough to say that the offense had any hand in anything approaching a winning effort in those games. And when you have this situation where the offense is scoring so little and they're so ineffective that they're putting the defense back out there all the time, you're starting to run a risk, I think. It's not sources inside the program telling me this or anything like that. It's just my own opinion. You're starting to run the risk of some of the defense, of frustration on the defense's side. And Pat Narduzzi, Randy Bates, all those guys are going to say to the defensive players, hey, if it makes you mad, get the ball back. Get some turnovers. Force a 3 and out. Put our offense back on the field. And rightfully so. That's what coaches should say. And that's what players should believe. A defensive player should never point fingers at the offense if they gave up a first down or a touchdown in a game. If you allowed the other team to score, then you obviously have something to fix on your own. And so you shouldn't worry about the other side of the ball. But when we sit here and look at it, and we see the complete ineffectiveness of the offense and how often they're putting the defense back on the field, I can't help but feel a little bit of sympathy for that side of the ball, even though, again, I keep saying this over and over again because I know how your minds work, even though that side of the ball has not been perfect and they've had plenty of issues of their own. Another stat I looked up, and I put this on Twitter and the message boards yesterday, because somebody, I think Warren Sharp, had a stat of NFL teams and what percentage of their drives end in punts or turnovers. Basically failed drives, right? And it was, obviously Steelers were at the bottom, near the bottom, not last, but close to it, maybe next to last. So I did Pitt stats, and let's set the Wofford game aside, right? Because the Wofford game, they had 11 drives. They only had, 11, but you could take out 2 because they were the end of the first half and end of the game. So let's say that the 9 drives, that were not, end of half drives, they had 7 scoring drives. They only punted twice. They had 6 touchdowns, a field goal, and 2 punts. So 2 punts, no turnovers out of 9 drives. That's great. But that was Wofford. Wofford still hasn't won. Wofford lost to Presbyterian. Wofford is not good, right? Set Wofford aside and you look at the 4 FBS games, taking out those end of the half drives. Let's not count them, whatever, unless they, the Carolina game, they end up attempting a field goal. So we'll count that one. All right. But drives when the half ran out, they had, and it's really only a couple of drives, one against Cincinnati, one against Virginia Tech. Total over those 4 FBS drives, minus those 2 drives, they had 45 possessions against FBS teams. They punted or committed a turnover, interception, fumble, or turnover on downs on 32 of those 45 drives. 71.1%. If your offense is turning the ball over or punting on more than 70% of its drives, first of all, it's no surprise that you're losing time of possession by more than a half an hour in 4 games. Second of all, you are forcing your defense into such a difficult situation, such a challenging situation, compounded by the fact that your defense is struggling to stop the run and, not getting pressure on the quarterback and all those things. But you're forcing your defense into a really challenging situation where you're putting them back on the field over and over and over again with nothing to show for the offensive possession that preceded it. Defense plays different when they go out there with a lead. How often has Pitt had a lead over the course of these 4 games? Not much. Not very often. Not often enough to allow the defense to get comfortable and settle in and attempt to dictate a game. But that's the situation. 71.1% of Pitt's possessions ending in a punt or a turnover. Here we are again. We're going down the road of the offense. Let's talk about the defense. All right. 16 total sacks. It still ranks 19th in the nation. They're still top 20 in sacks in the nation. I'm surprised by that. This is a question we asked, I think, Charlie Partridge last week when Pitt still ranked like 11th in the nation in sacks, or sacks per game, I think was the stat. And we said, that's where you rank. Does it feel like your pass rush is having that kind of an impact? Do you feel like your pass rush is having the kind of impact that it needs to have, that you guys have been grown accustomed to having, and that it needs to have in order for this defense to work? And he said, well, no, you look at our record and, obviously nothing's working. So he's right. I think as you look at it, it doesn't feel like the pass rush is making that kind of impact. Now, there were probably 4 sacks they left on the field Saturday night at Virginia Tech. Situations where they just didn't get Kyron Drones. And I'm saying Drones, even if I say it a little bit fast and it sounds like Jones. I know his name is Drones. Somebody else had that comment on the YouTube comments. They just didn't get him to the ground. Against a smaller quarterback, somebody who doesn't weigh 240 pounds or whatever Drones weighed, somebody who's not built like him, they probably turn into sacks. Dayon Hayes probably has 2 sacks in that game, at least. Doubles his sack total for the season. Now, what Dayon Hayes is doing is leading Pitt in pressures. He's got 19 pressures so far, according to Pro Football Focus. That would have ranked, I think, 7th most on Pitt's defense in all of last season, and he's got it in 5 games. He's also, relatively high among pass rushers with at least 100 or edge rushers with at least 100 pass rush snaps, I think, this season. Those 19 pressures rank inside the top 20 or top 15. Okay, so he's producing in terms of pressures, but what Hayes is not doing is finishing the play. He's not getting the sack. There were multiple opportunities against Kyron Drones. There were probably a couple opportunities against Drake May. Those are difficult guys to sack. Not everybody they're going to face is like that, but some of them are. Garrett Schrader can run. Riley Leonard, when he's healthy, can run and move around. I feel with Dayon Hayes, and I understand that there's some frustration or disappointment in how he has played so far this season because he's supposed to be the next guy. And this is supposed to be his season to step into that role as the next big producing edge rusher, defensive lineman at Pitt under Charlie Partridge. That was the expectation, and he's got 2 sacks through 5 games. That's not living up to the expectation, and it's exacerbated by the fact that their defensive line as a whole is not producing a lot. But I think as long as Hayes continues to get those pressures, as long as he's impacting the quarterback, getting in there and sort of squeezing the quarterback, I think that bodes well for him going forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see Deion Hayes in the next few games have a multi-sack game. Something like he could have had against Virginia Tech, where he gets to the quarterback 6 times. I think he had 6 pressures in that game. He had 6 missed tackles. Excuse me. Sorry, I got my numbers a little bit mixed up there. Let me bring up Hayes' numbers. I had it in front of me. Looking at Pro Football Focus, which is where we get a lot of these stats like pressures and snaps and whatnot. So he had 3 pressures against Virginia Tech, 6 missed tackles. In total, he's got 19 pressures so far this season. I can see those pressures turning into sacks. You know what I mean? I think those pressures will turn into sacks. I think he's winning the battles at the line of scrimmage when he's one-on-one against an offensive tackle. A lot of times he seems to be lining up against a right tackle, but when he's one-on-one against an offensive tackle, he's winning a lot of those battles. He's getting into the backfield and getting after the quarterback. He just needs to finish the plays a little bit more, and I think he has to understand what it takes to finish those plays, the details and sort of that extra gear that you've got to have to not just win the battle against the offensive lineman, but then get to the quarterback and finish the play, get him down or force him into a bad throw and give your defensive backs a chance to get more interceptions, which they've only had 1 so far. So I think I expect Deion Hayes to kind of blow up here in the next few games. I think he'll have a big game at some point coming up. I'm not as concerned about him. I think the defensive tackles are giving you about what you probably should have expected. I think we talked about this in the offseason. When you look at the defensive tackles, you're looking at a group that has no real history of productivity. Even the guys who have played a long, long time, Devin Danielson and Tyler Bentley and David Green, they're just not productive defensive tackles, and that's okay. Not everybody's going to be Kalijah Cansey or Jalen Twyman or Aaron Donald, but when you're not getting the production from the defensive ends, and they're not right now, then it becomes even more sort of, again, that word exacerbated by the fact that the tackles don't really do that. Pretty good stuff in the run, pretty good at opening holes and eating up blockers for the defensive ends and the linebackers, but making the plays themselves and putting up those stats and being productive, that's not really who they are, and it's not who they've been at all over the course of their careers. Thought there was a chance that DeAndre Jules maybe would be that guy, just the way they talked him up in training camp. That hasn't really come to pass. I thought there was a chance that Sean Fitzsimmons would get in and make more of an impact. Injury has held him back. Virginia Tech was probably the most he has played all season. Let me look at the snap counts real quick for Fitzsimmons. He's only played in 2 games. He played 1 snap against West Virginia, according to Pro Football Focus, 1 snap on defense, and 13 snaps against Virginia Tech. So he's still coming along. I think he can be that kind of a pass rusher and potentially productive, but he's not there yet, particularly when it's supposed to be his first season of real playing time, significant playing time, and he's been hurt and missed 3 out of 5 games, effectively 4 out of 5 games so far. So that one might take a little while longer to come. What they really needed this year, and they still need, and they're going to continue to need, and I'm not ruling out the possibility of it happening, is the younger defensive ends stepping up. They got Bam Brema out there, and he's playing and making some plays, not a ton, but some. Nate Temple is out there and participating. But what they really need is Sam Okunlola, Nikai Johnson, Jimmy Scott. Those 3, I think they're all redshirt freshmen. Johnson's a redshirt sophomore. Defensive ends need to step up and produce. And they're getting more reps. I mean, you're seeing, Charlie Parcher said it last week that he wants to see one of those guys really emerge as sort of the 4th end and kind of really grab hold of that spot in the rotation, and it hadn't happened yet. And, I don't know if it really happened from the Virginia Tech game either. But I think, looking at them, see who played the most in that game among those young, those 3 guys that we're talking about. Okunlola played 17 snaps, Jimmy Scott played 7, and Nikai Johnson played 2. By that, Okunlola looks like he's the guy who's, maybe separating himself a little bit. And we've heard a lot of great things about him since he arrived as a true freshman last spring, the spring of 22. And he's made a couple plays. I think he's got 2 sacks already this season. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he's, as productive as anybody. Yeah, he's got 2 sacks, which ties him for the team lead with Hayes, who has 2. I'm sorry, actually, Bam Brema has 3. He's got the team lead in sacks with 3. Shane Simon's got 2. Dayon Hayes has 2, and Sam Okunlola has 2 as well. So those guys, Okunlola could be that guy to step in. We talked a lot this offseason about young players on defense and how they were going to have to step up and how they would get better over the course of the season, but it might be rough early on. I think we've seen that. We've seen that with the young defensive linemen who have played. I mean, the defensive tackles have been old. They're older guys, they're veteran guys, and they've largely done what they've done over the course of their careers. There should be no surprises there, and really should be no disappointment because that's who they are. Defensive ends, you're still looking for some of those inexperienced and younger players to step up and make plays. But then you move back to linebacker. You lose Bengali Kamara in the West Virginia game, so you've played the last 2.5 games without him. That's created increased reps for Kyle Lewis and Braylon Lovelace. And you're going to have issues when you go with younger players like that. That's natural. They're going to make mistakes. Just like Bengali Kamara early last season made mistakes and looked like he was lost and out of place, but by the end of the year, he was playing pretty well. I think you're seeing that again with Kyle Lewis and to a lesser extent Braylon Lovelace, because he's really just starting to move himself into that rotation. Played a lot at Virginia Tech, and I imagine that'll continue over the course of the season. And I think you'll see Lewis and Lovelace both play better as the year goes on. Lovelace made a big play with the touchdown, the scoop and score at Virginia Tech. I think he'll keep playing well, and I think Lewis will keep playing well as well. I think those guys will improve over the course of the year. And then you go back to the back end with Javon McIntyre, PJ O'Brien, Donovan McMillan. These are 3 guys who are starting and playing a ton of snaps for the first time. And I know, O'Brien played a lot in the Sun Bowl. McIntyre started the Sun Bowl. I mean, this is the real deal. This is the real thing of being full-time starters playing full-time snaps. And there are bumps in the road. You're going to run into those hiccups and those mistakes, and unfortunately, they're going to lead to big plays, and they're going to lead to touchdowns. And that's especially bad because your offense can't score. Your offense is only scoring 2 touchdowns a game, less than 2 touchdowns per game against FBS competition. So when you make a mistake and it leads to a big play or it leads to a touchdown, it looks even worse because if you give up more than 2 touchdowns, you're kind of screwed. Your offense can't make up that difference. The last 2 games, they've scored 3 touchdowns, but there was a kick return against Carolina and a scoop and score defensive touchdown against Virginia Tech. This offense can't score, and so every mistake is magnified because it hurts that much more, because it makes it even more difficult for the offense to try and keep up. And I've said it a million times this season, you need the defense to keep the game in range for the offense. And unfortunately, you have sort of a perfect storm of an offense that just is ineffective and unable to score, and a defense that is going through the growing pains. I don't have a lot of doubts about the talent on defense. I think there are really good players on defense. I think there are talented players on defense at most spots. I mean, they have some areas they could upgrade. There are always areas to upgrade. But for the most part, I think they're a talented group. But you're seeing the perils of inexperience and youth, and it's costing them. And so they end up, actually 23rd in scoring defense, which is not that bad. They're 55th in rush defense, which is pretty bad. 74th in scoring defense, but giving up 26 points per game doesn't really sound as bad as saying 74th. 51st in third down defense. I mean, they're just a middle of the road defense. Not particularly bad on defense, but not particularly good either. Or at least they haven't been so far. But this is what we said, right? This is what we said from the spring and the summer, that it might take some time for this defense. You're going to need them to come out and look much better against Louisville and Wake Forest as they move forward on this schedule. You're going to need to see improvements, especially some of these guys who have been thrust into action like Lewis and Lovelace get more snaps and get more reps and get more comfortable out there. Adding Bengali Kamara back into the mix would help as well. All right, that was a few thoughts on the defense. I mean, I'm sure we'll have more things to come up in the mailbag, and we'll talk about it tonight on the live show, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. But you don't want to miss any of these things. So make sure you like and subscribe. Like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you never miss any of our Pitt video content. Don't forget, tonight, 8:30 p.m., we'll have the live show. Me and Jim Hammett talking about Pitt sports for an hour. And, yeah, look forward to it. Join in with your comments and questions. We'll have a little back and forth for an hour. We'll talk a little Pitt, and then we'll all move on with our night. So it's always a good time. We always enjoy these live streams, so hope you can join it tonight and be a part of it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Then check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you've had a great week so far. It's the middle of the week, moving further and further away from that Virginia Tech game and closer and closer to a weekend with no Pitt football. So, hopefully you can enjoy it. But thanks again for tuning in. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.